Hello, this is Marisol Solar Terralacher, psychotherapist and consultant, and this is the Resilience and Resistance Podcast, a podcast about successful Black, Indigenous women of color who have overcome trauma and become resilient. Hi, Rosa.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So we had the opportunity to chat a little bit, and I told you that I was doing so much research on your work and what you're doing and who you are. And I'm so excited to have you here because I think this is such an important topic. And I'm just so excited about the work that you're doing presently and the work that you're continuing to do. So I would love for you to introduce yourself. Just tell us a little bit about who you are, how you identify, and more about your organization.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Rosa. I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 32 years. I research the murders of Black women and girls, specifically in the Black community. And my research started back in 2015. I noticed that in 2015, the FBI's data at that time stated that, and this was across the board, irrespective, of race, creed, color, that every 19 hours, a woman was being murdered. I kind of took issue with that because I knew in the Black community alone that it was more than that. And then when you look across the board, every 19 hours, you would think that it would be somewhere about 400 murders across the board, for the year. I knew that that number was just below what was being said. So at that time, I started collecting the data on my own. At that time, for the year of 2015, just within the Black community, I cut off like 9 hours. So it was actually every 10 hours back in 2015. And then as you move along, it kind of stabilized, or plateaued. But when we got closer to like the end of the 20 teens, I should say, into 2020, it went down. It started moving along to every 8 hours. And then near the end of 2020, in October, it was at every 6 hours. So this, is at the time that myself and there were two women who were working with me at the time. We started collecting the data, and I started saying, hey, we need to push this every 6 hour hashtag out. So we started making this push on social media to use the hashtag every 6 hours. I got a lot of pushback from it. People were saying, oh, this is not true. This is propaganda. Of course, the usual typical feminist agenda.
Right.
But I just didn't let up. In 2021 September, we had a march in Atlanta for femicide, or against femicide, to talk about the topic. We didn't really have a huge turnout, but again, this was the first march, and we kind of didn't really expect a big turnout. So that was September 25th. On September 28th of 2021, 3 days after the march, the FBI indeed corroborated what I was saying, that it was every 6 hours. For the year of 2020, we had, the data was 1,169, which we collected. The FBI stated that their data was 1,440. So we were just 271 shy of what they put out there, but still the FBI, as opposed to, this organization who has no funding, is done totally volunteer. And for them to have a bigger budget and more manpower, I think we did pretty darn good to come that close to their number.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, I felt like vindicated, like, you know, we really were that close. Now, I can say today, the numbers are somewhere around, we're probably around 110, 112, and it's February 1st. And
Wow.
so we actually, I'm predicting that we'll probably be around 5.5 hours, if not 5 hours, by the end of this year. And then take into account that South Africa is the most dangerous place on the planet for a woman or girl. And they're actually at every 4 hours in South Africa. So the United States is like right on their heels. So my push has been to, talk about Black femicide within the community, but this still opens up a much broader conversation about femicide globally and, for women across the globe. So, while in the United States, yes, that's the focus because no other demographic is facing that, outside of indigenous women and girls. Of course, we know about the missing and murdered indigenous women, but the United States at this time will not formally recognize femicide as a cause of death because it's so specific.
Yeah, would love for you to define femicide because I think that people hear that and then I think they don't understand why the distinction is important.
The dis-
And
Go ahead.
no, yeah, I would just because I think that that's an important part for you is like you were saying it's the distinction is important because I think it gives us important data that informs
Yes.
other things. So I would love for you to speak to that.
The distinction, the reason why femicide is very important and it's very important to categorize it as such is because many times what you'll see is that women or girls are being targeted. Whether that is because they're in a domestic violence situation, because it might be random where they are targeted specifically because of their sex. They're raped or they're seen as more vulnerable and easier target. These are gender-based crimes. And we have to continuously make that distinction because while the government or the United States, across the board, we can say that they recognize hate crimes, whether it be for religion, race, your sexual orientation. But for some reason, when you talk about specifics about women and girls being murdered, the government and jurisdictions do not want to delve into that arena because it is very, very specific. And that is it is a defined hate crime. It's rare that they will say it's a sex-based or gender-based murder or crime. It happens, but it's very rare. And the reason I say this is because there have been times where a man or a male will go into a home and we'll say murder suicides occur and they'll kill all the women and girls and leave the boys, and the males will escape with an injury that is not life threatening. Many of these crimes I have recorded where the women usually end up murdered. And like I said, if it's a male involved, they escape with injuries that are not life threatening. And when we are talking about homicides, and this is something that I need to bring up, like I had told you before. When we talk about homicides, the Latin root of homicide, the homo is male. So when we're talking about homicides, Normally, we are talking, and it's already embedded in the culture that we are talking about the murders of men. But when you want to be specific about women and girls, people get nervous. They don't want to talk about it. They want to dismiss it. And they want to put all murders under the category of homicides. But women and girls being targeted are very specific. So we need to start defining that as femicide, because the definition of femicide is the intentional murder of a girl or woman based on the fact that they are women or girls. But the UN also has broadened that definition to say any murder of a woman or girl should be labeled as a femicide.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think that, to your point, this idea of being the specificity is so important in order to understand the problem. And also, I think the question that it raises is why is there so much resistance? What is the resistance about?
Generally, I can say within the Black community, it is misogyny. It's plain and simple. It's misogyny. And like most patriarchal cultures, the men are put first. Everything is based upon the man. Women and girls are secondary, it's almost like an afterthought. So women and girls don't matter much, in cultures where, the males matter. I know in South America and a lot of those in Latin cultures, the males, again, it's that machismo, I believe they call it.
The machismo.
Yes, that is what is the focus. So, we have to be very specific, because patriarchy has even led many women to have internalized misogyny, where they don't even realize that they are still pushing the patriarchal agenda forward, but that's because they also have been indoctrinated from knee high.
Absolutely. It's so baked in that we don't even understand how internalized that misogyny and the patriarchy is, and that we then play into all of those the ways that the system continues to oppress women and girls.
Yes.
And I mentioned too, Rosa, that this also helps to contextualize a problem around the idea of the disposability of women. And then I think more specifically to your work, this idea, the idea that Black women are disposable. And, I think that the reason why it's so important to be able to make this distinction is because it helps us understand those deeper rooted issues.
Yes. For so long, femicide was generally something that people associated with Africa, India, China. They wanted to put it on third world countries. But these are issues that are happening in first world countries as well. So I personally believe that people do understand what femicide is, because as in the countries that I mentioned, people will talk about how the female fetuses, were murdered. People would give birth and murder if their first child was a female. And China, the same thing was happening when they were having the one-child law, and they right now are suffering the repercussions of all those murders of infants, because now the males in that country are having problems finding partners. And so, so people know what it is. People in first world countries just have an issue reckoning with the fact that it's happening in our countries as well. That we don't want to reckon with that. So many of us don't want to. In fact, someone at the UN had mentioned to me, it's a hard mountain to climb when you're talking about femicide within the United States or, Canada, because of the fact that these are first world countries. And if they were to actually recognize this as an issue, it would kind of put a bad spotlight, I guess, on their place in that first world status. So, that's an issue. They don't want to, really tackle that. But the data shows that it's happening here in the United States, in the Black community, and across the board, really.
Yeah, and I would love for you to speak a little bit more to how this intersection between interpersonal violence and femicide, because I think, like you were saying previously, that when these things happen, that it can just be pushed off as oh well, these things happen, right? There was violence in the relationship, and she was a victim to that violence, but it's really important that that we're able to understand that intersection in a really in a more expansive way.
Yes, we have to understand that when we're talking about it, a lot of times, and this is really even the legal authorities, I should say law enforcement, they will chalk it up as this was just a relationship gone bad. This was a violent, tumultuous relationship. This was bound to happen, especially if we're talking about a woman who, a couple who may have had previous engagement with law enforcement, and the woman, usually either takes out a protection order, presses charges, but then later rescinds it. So they see it as a repeat cycle. This is just some interpersonal stuff that this couple has went through. And unfortunately, they shrug their shoulders. Well, it was bound to happen. This is the result of that relationship. It is much deeper than that, because you have to look at the historical context of femicide and how even to this day, law enforcement can also be part and parcel of the problem, because they still have this antiquated idea of just go home, patch things up, you guys separate, cool off, and then, discuss it later. So even law enforcement still has this antiquated idea that this is something that happens with certain couples, and they just need to just deal with their issues. They don't want to look at it as actually a gender-based violence, because normally men who abuse women, they don't abuse other men.
Exactly.
So
right.
we know that this is definitely sex-based, because women are seen as weaker. These men know who their victims are. They target that demographic, and it's women. It's really not just the woman that they're with, because a lot of these men, history has shown that they are abusive to any woman. It's not just a woman that they may be involved with. They have a history with their mother, with their sisters, with female co-workers. So it's a history against women.
I love that distinction. That's so helpful, because I think that, like you said, it's easy to just put it off to the relationship or the conflict in the relationship or the relationship dynamics. But to be able to make that distinction that this man in this relationship doesn't just have an issue in that relationship, he has an issue of violence toward women in all different contexts. And that, to be able to help people understand that this is not just a one-off, right? This is not just a relationship gone bad. This is part of a much deeper issue.
And that's why one of the reasons why I call for a domestic violence registry. We need to have some type of registry in the same manner in which we have a sex offender registry. We need to have a registry where, whether it be men or women at this point, if we have a domestic violence registry, we can look and see who has a history. Once they have been tried in a court of law and they have been charged with that crime, they need to be placed on a registry so that people are able to look at this registry and see that, hey, well, this person has this type of history. This might be somebody that I want to steer clear of, especially, when we talk about the safety of women, we have to use every available tool, and a domestic violence registry would be a tool to help navigate when you are trying to be involved with someone.
Yeah. Hey, it's Marisol. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Really quick, I wanted to let you know that we have partnered with US Bank on their mission to power human potential through their Community Possible grant program. This program is dedicated to supporting communities like this one while addressing racial and economic inequities. This could be a great opportunity for you, so click the link in this episode description, learn more, and apply. And I know this is I'm about to ask a question that I know has like a big answer. But when you think specifically about Black, Indigenous, and women of color, how are they more vulnerable to femicide?
Because it's the culture. It's big, but usually it involves cultural attitudes, cultural norms, especially in the Black community, because in the Black community, we have a history of not being, we can't trust the police. That's how many feel. We can't trust law enforcement. We can't trust the legal system because many times people feel that, we have been victimized. Yes, there have been people who have been innocent of crimes and who have been targeted just specifically because they're Black and they're targeted. I understand that. I'm not going to deny that has happened, but we cannot allow these monsters to be in the community. They know that the community will protect them because of this history. Many times people use a history to their advantage because the first thing people say, well, don't call the police because, the police are going to kill him. The police are going to just lock another Black man up. So these are the continuous mantras that you hear. You don't want another Black man or boy killed. You don't want to be responsible for putting another Black man or boy in jail. So again, it's baked into the culture. So instead of me getting the authorities involved, I'll just deal with it my way. And many times, the reality is you can't deal with it. If you're not a woman who has the financial resource to say, pick up and move, that's not a reality for you. Many times, especially if you have children, you have to stay where your help is, where your network is. So you end up becoming a victim of circumstance.
Yeah, and I think this is such a difficult conversation to have, right? When we think about communities of color and how violence and, again, that the oppression that just exists within those communities, it's really difficult to have conversations about how the value of cis hetero men are more valued than other lives, particularly
I've had this
women.
Conversation with women who have been abused, and as a nurse, because I'm a nurse, so I usually have to talk to people where they are. So one of the things that I will say to them, would you rather, these are your options, him going to jail or you possibly being buried by your family?
Yeah.
Those are your options.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be realistic with women when you're talking to them. It might seem harsh, but because society, and we see that, is becoming more and more violent, we have to just be realistic that if you're staying in certain situations, this could be a reality for you. So you have to, self-preservation many times is something that's lost in communities of color. Because again, we're valuing what might happen to this man over what is a reality that we might get hurt. So you have, when you lose your sense of self-preservation, I mean, really all is lost at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this idea that I think especially, again, thinking specifically about Black, Indigenous, and women of color, that there's a way that we are already dehumanized, and, we are trying to get our humanity back in so many different ways. And, even, as you're talking about that example, I think it's so important for us to think about how we internalize that dehumanization, that we are willing to risk our lives for what we feel is more valuable in our community, which is a male life.
We self-sacrifice. We actually become sacrificial lambs for the community because we know who the community values, even if we don't say it. Our actions show exactly who is valued in the community because we are more afraid of what may happen to them than what may happen to ourselves. And like you say, when we talk about Black women, Black, Indigenous, and women of color, it's the dehumanization. We are seen as objects, to be used and discarded at will. Our humanity is not really seen. Again, like I said, we are objectified. We're seen as sexual beings. We're seen as just beasts of burden. Women who are so used to, working hard and being the backbone of the community. All of these things. Normally, like I said, I talk about Black communities, but when I think about the Indigenous women and women of color, Latino women, it's the same thing. It's matriarchal. I call it a dystopic matriarchal system because it's not a true matriarchal system. Women are indeed the backbones of the communities, but they are not treated as such. So it's dystopic. It's not a true matriarchal community in the sense that you see historically when women actually headed communities. They were the village elders came to the women for advice. The women were the ones who decided who were in power. We are now, it's just matriarchal in name only.
Oh my gosh, Rosa, that is like the best description I've ever heard. I would love for you to talk about your work with MIT. I think it's with the MIT and the CDC. Is that right?
Well, it's the United Nations. It's a global collective of women around the globe in different countries who actually independently research femicide in their regions. Because again, jurisdictions, and this is a global issue, not just the United States, jurisdictions don't really focus on the women. They just lump it all in, and they want to say, well, it was a more violent year or it was a less violent year, but they're not taking into account across the strata, like men versus women, what were the numbers like. So women have started collectively rising up and saying enough is enough. We need to focus on women and girls and start collecting this data so it can start being put in a global database, if you will, so we can start looking at the numbers and again going to the UN so the UN can start, maybe talking about this on a bigger level, because the UN is for all the nations. So this is something that the UN would definitely be interested in, is getting all of this data collected from around the globe, from all of these women who are really, really putting their heart and soul into the dedication of bringing a name to what is going on with us.
Yeah. And I saw, in part of your work on social media is really putting a face and a name to the women who are murdered.
Yes. What I do when I get a name of a victim or hear about it, and it's really just good old fashioned grunt work, just tedious, doing searches, going through the different news media, going to different sites that might collect data for their area, like the Los Angeles Times actually has a homicide section. The same for Baltimore, Chicago. There are certain metro areas that actually compile the victims. So I go to sites like that. I actually get tips also from people in different areas that might be small towns, because small towns don't have a large media. So what they'll do is say, hey, this happened in my town. This is the victim. Can you post about it? Family will send me information and say, hey, my loved one was killed and nobody's talking about it. Can you post it? So I'll post the victim's picture, the date when they were murdered or the date that they died, because sometimes they were injured and don't succumb to their injuries, till sometime later down the road. So I personally don't, when I post a date, it's the date that the victim died as opposed to the actual date of the incident. I'll put in the body that, well, this incident occurred on the 12th, but she succumbed to her injuries 12 days later. So, I put the incident, what happened, if the assailant is known, I'll do a follow-up with an update to show the suspect. But if the perpetrator is not known, I put the information, call this number, this hotline, if you know anything about this murder, to, help this family get some closure and bring this person to justice.
Because, I think that there's so much critique in the media about how missing, murdered white women get more publicity is not the right word, but get more airtime, get more attention, and that
that's true. It is true, but I'm realistic, because I know that who founded this country. And a lot of times people, and this is just natural human nature, people tend to focus on people who look like them. There are not a lot of people in the media. There are, yes, there are Black people in the media. There are Latino women in the media, indigenous women in the media. But they are not, whether it's male or female, but they are not a big enough number where they control that game. So people tend to focus on people who look like them because that's their community of people. So in some ways, I do critique them, but then I also understand that it's human nature to gravitate towards that which looks like you. So it kind of concerns you because that's your community. So, for me, it's a twofold thing. Yes, the media could do a better job, but then again, we don't have enough representation where we could make those moves.
Yeah, and I think about the work that you do is, there, like you said, it's the research and gathering the data and really trying to understand this as a global issue, and then helping, here in our country, us being able to come to terms with the fact that this is an issue. And then also just bringing attention, on those platforms that it brings humanity to the women who have been murdered.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I also work with Dawn Wilcox. She actually does Women Count USA. She actually started me on my journey towards this. Like I said, she runs Women Count USA, and she looks at murders, of women across the board. She does cold cases. She does it. She does it all. But I saw a need in the Black community where we have so many things culturally that we need to stop. So because I know within the Black community, women and girls are seen many times as an afterthought, I felt that this is something that needed to be talked about. And it's never to say that anyone else's murder is not important. I want to make that clear. But many times in our community, we tend to focus on law enforcement involved murders of Black men and boys. Black women and girls also get killed by law enforcement. But again, you don't hear too much about it. You might hear about your Sandra Bland's, your Breonna Taylor's, your Tatiana Jefferson's, but those are just 3 people.
Yeah, right.
There are many Black women and girls who have been killed by law enforcement as well. And, many people don't know their name. That's why Say Her Name became so popular, because people were just dismissing the other half of the community. So, many times people say we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but we don't see that reflected. So, that's the purpose of my work, is to bring attention to all the Black women and girls who are being killed in the community, no matter who kills them.
Yeah, I would love for you to speak to the rally that you're organizing in September of this year.
Yes, we actually have moved it up to August, but yes, and it's going to be in DC. And what this again is about is bringing awareness to Black femicide. It's important for it to be held in DC because, of course, DC is the hub of all political activity. We want lawmakers to know that we will no longer be silent about this issue. We want lawmakers to listen to our grievances and start to enact policy that will help with this crisis. Right now, Minnesota is the only state in the union that actually has a task force set up to investigate the missing and murdered Black women and girls within their state. Every state in the union needs something like that. The missing and murdered Indigenous women, they have legislation now, to help with that crisis. And that's the same thing we want for missing and murdered Black women and girls. We really do have a crisis. And unfortunately, people see this discussion as one that's very divisive when it should not be so. This should be about togetherness because we as a whole need to come together to fight this.
Absolutely. And if our listeners wanted more information about the rally or just more information on how to support your work, where could they find that?
Actually, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm more active personally on Facebook and Twitter. Those are the sites that I personally run. And so you can go to those sites. You can also email me at blackfemicideus@gmail.com. And again, but you can always reach me on Facebook or Twitter. Just put in Black Femicide US or Black Femicide America, and it should be the first thing that comes up in your search. And you can always DM or inbox me, and I'll be, I'm very, very responsive.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally vouch for that. Yeah, and we'll put all that information in the show notes for ways that people can connect with you and contact you. And yeah. Rosa, thank you so much for being on this podcast. This was so helpful and so enlightening and just so enriching. And I'm so excited for everyone to hear this and for us to get more, I think, just momentum around this issue and more support.
Yes, thank you so much. And, we welcome all allies, we welcome all allies. And in fact, if this is an issue that's important to you and your community, contact me and we can talk further about how we can go about getting it started so you can focus on your community. Because femicide is indeed a global issue. It reaches every community. And the more women we have tackling this issue, the more power we will have with letting policymakers know that we're no longer going to be silent about this.
Yes, I love it. Thank you again. And I look forward to talking to you more in the future, Rosa.
Well, thank you so much.